a friend of mine worked with someone who does the Tecmo Madison tournament to auction off or raffle off a day of golfing, I think, with Bo Jackson.
Wow.
So, it took time to get to that point. And for many of us, we've been following this game for 20 plus years, and to see where it's gotten to now, we could not have even imagined it. We were just fans of the game, and we just can't imagine. We couldn't imagine back then how popular the game would become.
No, it is pretty amazing. Not only do you see it, in commercials, but in pop culture. Family Guy, which is a host of pop culture in many ways, did a 5-minute skit on Bo Jackson running around the field and how unstoppable he was, and so it's seeping into even newer gamers and newer mainstream audiences. And that's pretty amazing. That's something that just a bunch of guys online who were interested in just being nostalgic or continuing fun that they knew was present in a great game turns into this big pop culture icon itself. And it's interesting what you're saying, that it's come to the point where add-ons and emulators allow you to really personalize the game. How do you feel modern technology has impacted retro gaming? Has it impacted overall positively? Has it taken away of some of the original feel? Where do you feel retro gaming is and where it's headed?
You get Tecmo purists, as we call them, people who don't want you to touch the game at all. That's the way the game is supposed to be played, with the original 28 teams and no modifications to it. I see the benefit of that, but it's existed for so long that it was bound for people to make modifications to the game. Some of the people who are very involved in the Tecmo community do have a computer science background. Some of them are even computer engineers, and they go through the code of the game itself and make these kinds of modifications. The most basic types of modifications are obviously to the players, the rosters that they have, and that's one type of modification. But there's even deeper modifications to the game that some people don't like. They say it changes the gameplay. To give an example, there's some attributes that were in the original game that didn't matter. The programmers didn't actually... There's a number that appears on the screen that says, for example, a player is this fast. But in reality, that attribute didn't have any impact. So some people go back and make that attribute have a kind of impact in the game. Other things where, for example, I think someone programmed where if you press a certain button, you can actually control the wide receiver jumping. That's not in the original game. Or where if two players grapple one another, push off against one another, in newer version, someone's modified it so that they actually move in the game. Like, you can actually move someone back a few yards, which I think is kind of neat. It keeps it creative, keeps it fun, but it's allowed for a different feel of the game, and these things wouldn't have been possible without the use of emulators, without the use of certain tools. I can't remember the different types of tools that were used to edit the code, but people really, they go in and they look at the actual code that was used to make the game and make all these different types of changes.
Where do you think retro gaming and gaming in general is going? Just with the advancement of various virtual reality forms that are out there, and being able to have the ability to place yourself in a game, and with just the overall mainstream aspect of it, that an average person can have access to high-end technology that you can adjust, whether you like it or not, adjust a game to your liking and create it. Do you think that gaming is just going to become more of a mainstream pop culture thing, or just part of people's everyday lives, or do you feel that's going to still be a niche market in many ways?
That's a good question. I think, unlike maybe some other types of medium that disappear, I think that there's a place for, first of all, I think there's a place for physical media. Like a lot of video games now are downloadable. You mentioned virtual reality. People aren't going to spend, I think, maybe they will. I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I can't see people spending their entire day using virtual reality. There's still going to be an appeal to just something simple. The original Nintendo, which Tecmo Super Bowl is on, is a directional pad and basically 2 buttons. It's something that anyone could just pick up and play. You have a young kid. A lot of times, for very young children, Atari, which is a joystick and a button, that is some people's introduction to gaming, because it's very simple. Children are developing. They're developing certain skills, matching what's on the screen to kind of having control over it. So there's certain things where I think that there's still going to be an appeal for that. People are still going to look to these things and still collect it. Now, will it still be as big? I don't know. Maybe in 50 years it won't be, but I can't see outside of our lifetimes this really ever going away. I still think that there's still going to be people who are into this kind of stuff, just like if you think of music. People still collect vinyl.
True.
Vinyl's made a big comeback. There's a certain type of sound that people say they get from vinyl, or people just like having the physical media. And they like something about that. Maybe more... A lot of modern games are too complex. And maybe, as you mentioned, for the hardcore gamers, they get into that market until maybe something comes along and revolutionizes it, which makes it for everyone. But I think for most people, that's not going to be the case. They're still gonna find something that's simple to play, that's fun to play, and that's not going to be something that they have to become completely engrossed in order to get some value out of it.
Sure. So one final question. Where do you see the Tecmo community going? Do you see it growing? Do you see it pretty much staying steady? Where would you like the Tecmo community to go? Are you content with where things are and how it's been managed over the last decade or so, or do you have some aspirations and hopes for Tecmo Super Bowl community?
I think first and foremost to say that it's become bigger than we could ever imagine. Now, while there's clearly not the waves of people that you have interested in Tecmo Super Bowl than you have in modern games, even somewhat nostalgic games like Street Fighter, which still has newer iterations coming out every year, not every year, every few years, that it's still a very small community, but we never thought as a community that we would get to this point where we'd have multiple tournaments throughout the country going on every single month, where we had national exposure, not just through advertising and TV, but we had a documentary about our community created. It's astounding that even happened for something that after 1995, the company Tecmo just gave up on ever producing any newer versions of this game. So I'd say I'd like it to be preserved. I know that over time, a lot of the people who play the game, they're gonna get older. They're going to not have the ability to play the way that they did before. I do see some younger gamers getting into it, but usually it's people in their 20s maybe, looking back at this. So the community is going to shrink for sure, but I think it still has a good 20 years at least under its legs. We talk all the time about this. I think this question came up 5 years ago on a message board saying, oh, Tecmo's hit its peak. But here you still have people playing and you have more tournaments than ever. So, I don't know. Maybe it has hit a peak. Maybe it's hitting a peak right now. We're not sure where it's going to go.
Well, thank you, Brian. This has been fascinating. I do hope that Tecmo does continue another 20, 30 years, whether it's hit its peak or not. So thank you for coming out tonight and talking to me about and the audience about Tecmo Super Bowl and the community that's still active and growing.
No, thank you for having me. And if anyone wants to know, we have our annual Tecmo Super Bowl tournament October every year. It's October 20th this year. And you can register by going to northeasttecmo.com.
Excellent. So this has been another episode of POV. I'm your host, James Rausse, and we'll see you next month. Have a good night.